The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. A True Story by Carlos Royal. Mr. President and County Commissioners, I have provided you with all my documentation in advance in support of my market values, such as, but not limited to, appraisals, income, expenses, and comparable sales. I did not provide you with any cost approach values because that approach does not apply to 40-year-old apartment buildings as stated in every appraisal submitted to the State Board of Equalization for 2017 appeals. Plus, the state said in my 2018 appeals that income and sales were most relevant. Commissioners, can we talk? Commissioners, do you think I am really an unscrupulous person that is here to rip off the city, the county, the schools, and the parks, and that I'm here to do it with lies and nefarious information? Or do you think I'm here as an upstanding 76-year-old retired citizen that has supported the community for over 30 years, but now has a grievance with the city that my properties are not listed on the tax rolls at their true and full fair value or market value as required by law? I've been paying real estate taxes in Dickinson for about 35 years and never filed a complaint until 2017. That in itself should tell you something is wrong. Even though at one time I owned about 25% of all the rentals in Dickinson, I doubt that most of you had even heard my name before that. It's important how you see me, since the state has made you, the county commissioners, the overseer of the city's assessment process. You might not like it or even agree with it, but you have been assigned the task of the impartial finder of the facts. It's your duty to determine my property's market values from the information presented. You have the final say as to what my property assessments will be. Oh, I know there's court, but if we go to court, it's no longer about property values. Court's only about did you act arbitrary and capricious in making your decisions. So I ask you, please make your decisions based on the facts, with income and comparable sales being the most relevant as stated by North Dakota State Board of Equalization in their findings of my 2018 assessment appeals. Please note, the state reduced Silvergate 23%, Century 35%, and Park Place 16%. No change to 8th Avenue, and they increased Royal Manor 7%. Keep in mind that as we go through this process, as per the appraisals, there's very little difference between 2017 and 2018 values. Thus, I've included the state's 2018 results. What is considered proof of market value? Well, according to the state guidelines, appraisals, actual income and expenses provided by the owner, and comparable sales. Please take note of what's left out: assessor's opinion of value and other property assessments. I can say, for example, the property down the street sold for X amount and use it to prove or support my market value. Like with Park Place, where we have an identical sale just around the corner at $360,000. But I cannot say the property down the street or around the corner is assessed at X amount and use it to prove or support my market value, any more than the assessor can say the property down the street or around the corner is assessed at X amount, so yours should be too, unless the assessor has actually proven the market value of that property. According to one North Dakota Supreme Court justice, the assessor cannot point to another property's assessment as proof of market value unless he has proven its market value. Otherwise, it would be just a circle of he saids by the assessor. Do you think I lie when I quote the Century Code in the state tax guidelines that assessments are supposed to equal the true and full fair value or market value of the property? Does anyone disagree that the standard for assessments is true and full fair value or market value for residential and commercial property? North Dakota Century Code, ND CC 57020115. True and full value means the value determined by considering the earning or productive capacity, if any, the market value, if any, and all other matters that affect the actual value of the property to be assessed. That was clarified by the state tax guidelines. The standard for assessments is true and full fair value or market value for residential and commercial property. Market value is the same as true and full value for residential and commercial property. I read this as an assessment has to be corrected to its market value. There is no exception. What was the market value of my property as of February 1st, 2017? The value set date. In other words, what would it have sold for? While enrolled in an advanced appraisal course, I attended a lecture by one of the most noted MAI appraisers in the state of California at the time. I don't remember his name, but I do remember what he said. Look, you're going to come up with a lot of different numbers depending on which approach you take and what assumptions you make. So how do you reconcile those numbers to arrive at market value? Well, he said, here's what I do. After I have all my numbers, I make one last trip to the property and sit on the curb across the street. I look at the property and I ask myself, now just what the f*** will it sell for? Because that is true market value. I know the assessor said he can rip any appraisal apart, and I believe him. But do you think Joseph Ibach is lying when he says that Century is valued at $3.5 million as of February 1st, 2017, the value set date for 2017 assessments, and that Century Apartments is overassessed 150%, requiring a 60% correction? I mean, he's just North Dakota's most trusted and respected MAI appraiser, as shown by the city hiring him just last month to spot check / appraise the property they want to buy downtown Dickinson. Since the city believes Joe Ibach enough to hire him to appraise the properties they want to buy, shouldn't we, meaning you and I, also have the right to believe Joe Ibach's values for Century Apartments? Simple question. Easy to conclude. Please also note that according to Joe Ibach, that Century Apartments has been overassessed $16.4 million since 2015. Do you really believe that Mr. Greenlee was lying when he appraised my properties? He is, after all, licensed by the state of North Dakota, an MAI candidate appraiser, and he works for an MAI appraisal firm. Plus, he had appraised numerous properties in Dickinson for Wells Fargo Bank, who recommended him. I personally never met Mr. Greenlee, and when I offered to email him my property information, he turned it down and said he would gather all his own information. Joe Ibach and Corey Koss did the same. And by the way, I've never met them either. Do you believe Jason Hoffa, president of Dakota Community Bank here in Dickinson, was honest when he said he thought Century was worth just $1.5 million? Or do you think he was lying too? Do you think he would be part of a scheme to rip off the city and the county? Because I've found him to not only be brutally honest, but highly community-minded. Do you believe Jason Hoffa when he wrote, he, meaning me, has invested and reinvested into our community many times over, and his loyalty to Dickinson has shown him no favoritism? as he continues to struggle with overassessed property values? Do you think he was lying about my properties being overassessed when he wrote to Joshua, the state auditor, and basically said my request seems to keep falling on deaf ears? Do you believe West Plains Realty was lying when they said my properties would sell for $28,000 to $42,000 per unit, giving Century a high value of about $5 million and a low value of about $3.4 million? They have, after all, been doing business in Dickinson for over 35 years. If anyone should know local market values, they should. Do you believe I'm lying about my income going down? According to the state, income is one of the two major proofs of value. These are my actual gross incomes in red, and these are the assessments in blue in relation to that income. Do you believe I've fraudulently faked the numbers to make them look worse than they are? You might not want to acknowledge them, but these are the numbers. Do you think that when a market goes from a boom to a bust, it affects all properties the same? No, it doesn't. It doesn't even affect properties in the same class the same. That's why the assessor cannot correct for an economic shift using a blanket depreciation or obsolescence factor as he has tried to do. The issue is simple. The city assessor has elected to use a faulty system that does not account for changes in income. Paint fade is not the same as income. Why do you think the state said income and comparable sales are the most relevant, leaving out the cost approach? Normally, one would not need to go any further than this slide. We have the actual income, expenses, net, and the values using an 8% cap rate. We also have the appraised values and the comparable sales values. From those values, one would select a market value. I have selected the appraised market values not because they are lower, but because they are third-party independent values in all cases. The total of the comp sales is actually lower than the appraised values I selected. Owners don't normally do stabilized incomes. Appraisers do. I submitted professional appraisals. But since the assessor brought it up, I have stabilized my income based on February 1st, 2017, the set value date. At Century, garage rents were $50. One bedrooms were $400. Two bedrooms were $465. Please note, that's nowhere near the $2,700 the assessor tried to claim was low rent. And three bedrooms were $500. That works out to be $699,600 annual gross rents, including garages, 100% occupied, less 10% stabilized vacancy. I added in laundry and used 50% expenses before real estate taxes. Using a stabilized cap rate of 8% in the bright yellow line gives us a stabilized market value of about $3.56 million for Century Apartments, or right in line with Mr. Eibach's appraised value of $3.5 million. Before I get to my conclusions, I would like to comment on two deceptive charts that the assessor presented to the city. The first deceptive chart shows that if the assessor had used an 8 GIM, he would have underassessed Century Apartments by a staggering $23 million, just since 2011. I believe if he had, the city would have probably fired him. Do you really believe he underassessed Century Apartments $23 million? No, and he doesn't think so either. So he produces a second deceptive chart using what he presents as a more reasonable 6.5 GIM, where he would have only underassessed Century Apartments by $6.59 million since 2011. He wants everyone to believe he's not really the big bad wolf, or Mr. Scrooge, or the Grinch who stole Christmas, but that he's really Mr. Santa Claus, leaving gifts of underassessments for the taxpayer, while shortchanging the city. But is that true? No, he had the wrong data for 2011 and 2012. Using the corrected data and his hypothetical 8 GIM, he would have actually underassessed Century Apartments by over $25.2 million. And using his hypothetical 6.5 GIM, he would have underassessed Century Apartments by over $8.2 million. Wow! With those kind of underassessment gifts, you would think the assessor was on my payroll, or I was slipping him a few bonuses under the table. But wait, see those little numbers in yellow up there? 3.74, 3.55, 4, 4.92. They are the actual GIMs of Century Apartments for those years, based on the assessor's own assessed value divided by the actual gross income that year. If we take the actual average, 4.06 GIM, and use it, we find out that the assessor didn't really underassess Century Apartments, and that he's not really Mr. Santa Claus, but he is in fact the Grinch who stole Christmas and overassessed Century Apartments by more than $19.3 million since 2011. And that is documented, not hypothetical. As confirmed by Mr. Eibach's appraisals, showing Century has been overassessed $16.4 million just since 2015. So let me ask you, who is ripping off whom? Am I here to rip off the city, or am I here to try to stop the city and the Grinch from ripping off me? I have provided you values based on different sources and information, and not all of them match the appraised values. Heck, even the appraisers on Century don't agree. But one thing is true of all the sources and all the information. None support the assessor's assessed values. It's decision time. Let's use the Ben Franklin decision maker. A sheet of paper with a line down the middle. On my side, let's list why you should believe me. On the other side, the assessor. We will start with my side. I have presented market values based on actual income and expenses, market values based on stabilized income and expenses, market values based on comparable sales of properties like mine, market values based on documented historical gross income multipliers. I have presented one comparable sale, absolutely identical to one of my properties, Park Place, $360,000. I have presented third-party, independent, appraised market values by Joe Eibach, North Dakota's most noted MAI appraiser and recommended by Dakota Community Bank, and the same appraiser recently hired by the city. And by Benjamin B. Greenlee, MAI candidate appraiser, licensed by the state of North Dakota and recommended by Wells Fargo Bank. I presented a bank value by Dakota Community Bank President Jason Hopoff, who has been valuing local real estate and making loans for over 20 years in Dickinson. I presented local broker price opinion by West Plains Realty. West Plains Realty has been doing business in Dickinson for over 35 years. If anyone knows market values, they should. I provided all the information and data requested by the assessor, the city, the county, and the state. Now let's look at the assessor and what he has presented as proof of true and full fair value or market value. Actually, he has presented none. He did present some questionable market sales. Nothing based on income, nothing based on appraisals, nothing based on third-party opinions, no proof other than his opinion, which is not proof of market value unless he does an appraisal based on income and comparable sales, just as I'm required to do. Let me put it another way. To not believe me, you have to believe I lied about my income and faked the numbers, that Joe Eibach is wrong, that Mr. Cost is wrong, that Mr. Greenlee is wrong, that Mr. Kasmitter is wrong, that Wells Fargo Bank is wrong, that Mr. Hopoff is wrong, that Dakota Community Bank is wrong, that West Plains Realty is wrong, and that Bauer Property Management is wrong. But to not believe the assessor, all you have to do is understand he's stuck between a rock and a hard place, trying to defend a flawed and faulty system. You are not allowed to give me any value lower than the ones I have applied for. In yellow are the market values I requested. The bottom line in green is the percent correction it takes to correct my assessments to their market values. I ask you make a simple motion to correct my assessments to their appraised and documented market values. This hearing is not about my assessments being wrong, because I believe everyone here knows they are. Heck, even the assessor said at an open hearing, he's been off by as much as 60%, as proven by actual sales of apartments like mine, and he could agree with the common sense value as it applies to Century. But what was he to do with everyone else? That was Natalie's issue also at the appeal hearing. But this abatement hearing is not about everyone else. Your decision is prohibited from applying to anyone else. No, this hearing is about your honesty, your integrity, and your fairness. Or if there exists some ulterior motive not to correct my assessments. If the city has an issue with their faulty assessment system, it should be the city's problem, not mine. I shouldn't be penalized. Teddy Roosevelt said, knowing what's right doesn't mean much unless you do what's right. I ask you to do what's right and correct my assessments to their true and full fair value or market values. My retirement and the amount of food I can put on the table is in your hands. In effect, my financial life and what I've worked for over 50 years. I have shown you that due to overassessments that real estate taxes can exceed the net operating income. Your decisions will determine if I can buy Christmas gifts for my grandchildren, or if they get a lump of coal in their stockings as the city and the Grinch want to leave them.
You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch.
I want to kick myself because I meant to make this comment earlier. The assessing department does not use the income approach in its models. We just heard a 20-minute presentation on the income approach that the assessing department doesn't even use.
And their low is $2,700?
Yes,
They're low.
correct. That was what was reported to me.
And we verified that because I find that very hard to believe.
I did not call the person back, but that was the income statement that I sent out in the spring, and that's what they returned to me.
I just do not believe there is an apartment in this town that's renting for anywhere near that kind of money. The trouble with it is to market these properties for sale, hotels, apartments, it's based on income.
Right. Which isn't fair.
No. So do I believe somebody's going to come in and pay $7.89 million for Century Apartments? No. Or even close to that.
Right.
You know, I just look at some of these graphs, like this one, for instance, how close it runs till here. Assessments go here, and the income goes there. I mean, it's almost running perpendicular until the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, nothing is appraising in this market right now for cost. I mean, you can even take the La Quinta that I'm involved in, everybody knows. I mean, we have it listed for half of what it would cost us to build
Right.
right now.
Exactly.
I think that we agree that almost $8 million may not be fair in today's market.
Right. And you just think of things holistically of where our market is. You can tell just at glancing that these numbers are off, that
Yes.
that they don't make sense.
I'm not disagreeing that apartments aren't still overvalued. We show that with the 2 recent sales, but we're now less than 10%, where we were much higher than that. We were 60% overvalued on some of those sales.
Joe, you really
Well-
can just look at it logistically and go, there's no way that somebody's going to come in and write out a check for $7-some million for Century Apartments.
There is that common sense factor, if you will, with Century Apartments. But then what do you do with the other large complexes, Sierra Ridge and all of those? They will all be back. And they won't, you know, they'll be asking for the same thing. And
But in the end, isn't the point to be close to what it's worth? Not what, I mean, do we want to assess something for double its worth? I mean, is that our goal? Because it doesn't make any sense to me.
So you can't keep assessing and using 2015 at peak values for your value going forward. That's unrealistic. We are in agreement that the current assessed values are too high.